and welcome to today's Wired virtual briefing, hosted in partnership with Google Cloud. My name's Catherine Crump. I'm the Managing Director of Wired's consulting business, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion focused on creating and leading high-performing teams. During today's discussion, you'll hear from some leading voices from the world of sport and business, and we'll be digging into some often under-discussed areas. We're going to explore building resilience as leaders and helping our teams to build their own resilience. We'll also explore mental health, well-being, and how you can open up those conversations amongst your teams. And we'll also discuss how data and digital approaches can be used to complement human leadership. I'm also delighted to be joined in the studio today by Alex Rutter, Director of Retail from Google Cloud, and also Chris Blatchford, CIO of Kingfisher PLC. They'll be reflecting on Gareth's insights, they'll be drawing parallels for business leaders, and they'll be sharing their own experiences of leading high-performing teams. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Chris, Alex, welcome.
Hi.
So, we're going to start by thinking about leading high-performing teams in high-pressured environments. And as I've mentioned, there is surely nobody else in England right now who is better experienced to talk about that than Gareth Southgate. So we asked Gareth, given the extraordinarily high-pressured environment in which he operates, how does he build resilience amongst his team and maintain their motivation?
Yeah, I think keeping a team motivated requires constant referring to what the overarching vision is, what's our ultimate goal, assessing where we are in relation to that goal, so the honest appraisals, and in terms of building resilience, recognizing the moments where things go wrong, how we reacted in those moments. You know, we're in football, we're going to lose football matches, we're going to concede goals, but how we respond in those moments and how we react to these moments will determine how far we can go ultimately as a team. So I think really important to debrief events properly, debrief matches properly, debrief performances. And at times that's got to be critical, but critical in an environment that's open and where people feel they're not being attacked. So that there's a lot of talk about psychological safety. I think players in our world need to know that we're trying to make them better. We're trying to win collectively. We're all trying to do this together. It's not staff here, players there. It's one group coming together. But I think feedback is crucial, and learning from the defeats, I think, helps to build resilience. In the end, it's the experiences you go through in your life that build resilience. But sometimes you've got to be pointed in the right direction as to what you need to learn from those defeats.
Alex, I'd love to start by getting your thoughts on this. As a leader in one of the world's most successful companies, how do you go about helping your team to build resilience?
Well, I think resilience is something that comes over a period of time. Watching Gareth, I'm delighted that we don't have to do our job in the same level of public scrutiny that he does. I think when I look at the team and how we look to build resiliency, the first thing is to ensure that every challenge that we undertake, we break down or carve up into small manageable pieces. We don't look at big level programs of work anymore. In the world of agile, it's how do we celebrate all the successes that we make every single day, rather than having to focus on one large outcome. The other aspect of it is ensuring that, and Gareth talked about evaluating the failures, it's making sure that actually when we do things wrong, that there is a psychologically safe environment for people to explore that loss, understand why we did it, and crucially why we win as well, to make sure that people feel they can be themselves, talk safely, and that there's a culture that enables people to bring the best of themselves to work.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alex. And Chris, how have you gone about helping your team to build resilience?
Completely agree with Alex, number one. Completely agree with the carving up of the problem into smaller pieces to make it manageable. One of the things we try to live at Kingfisher, but also within our team, is challenge and commit. So the idea of challenge and commit is that you challenge the status quo, you challenge entrenched ways of thinking, you challenge dogma, but ultimately you all commit to a way forward. And what that does, that has the effect of building resilience within your team because you get used to conflict and you get used to debate. And if you can do that internally, that sort of builds a resiliency, a shell around yourselves for external debates and external conflict. And then beyond that, I think the North Star, having a really clear North Star that everyone's working towards. Obviously, Gareth was talking about what that is for him and the team, and Alex as well at Google. For us, having that clear North Star for the team and the business and all being able to run down the field in the same direction, regardless of how difficult things get, is super important. So try to live that mantra, and we try to paint that North Star, more of a constellation these days. But,
that's
North
fantastic.
Star, yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we've looked at building team resilience. Now let's have a think about personal resilience. And again, I think as leaders within businesses, that's obviously something that matters very much. So I think anybody who's followed Gareth's progress from England player to England manager will know that probably of all people, Gareth has had some good exercises in building personal resilience. And so we asked Gareth, what advice would you give to a new leader on building your own resilience when things are tough? Let's see what he had to say.
I think if I was advising a leader about building their resilience, the biggest thing I've learned is that everybody is going through the same challenges, and to recognise that you're not the only person feeling the way you do. So when I was a young manager, I had most of the challenges that I still have, but what I didn't have was evidence of results that worked. And so I was questioning myself as much as other people were questioning me. Now other people still question me, but I know over a period of time what's achieved results, and that a lot of the things I was doing even 10, 15 years ago were actually right. I was doing more right than I recognised at the time. So I think there's a reassurance for leaders that they're in the position they are because of lots of experiences. There's always more to learn, and there's always development to come. But you're probably doing a lot more things right than you might think, or than other people might be feeding back to you.
Okay, so some really great insights there from Gareth around recognising all the things that you're doing right and taking note of your own successes. So Chris, perhaps we could come to you first this time. What advice would you give to a new leader around building resilience when times are tough?
Some advice I've received previously is maintain a sense of purpose. So as a leader, as long as you have your own personal North Star and you're able to find the signal in the commercial noise in amongst stressful situations, if you're able to find that purpose, it will allow you to be resilient and drive for results. I think the other thing is make time for yourself. So make time to reflect and recharge. One of the things I look at on my watch a lot is something called a body battery. And my body battery is continually discharged. So it reminds me to spend time, go for a ride, spend time with my family, but whatever it is, just take the time for yourself to recharge and reflect and maintain a level of perspective, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. And Alex, what would you add to that around building resilience personally?
So I think just to echo Chris's point around making time for yourself, that's super important. What I wanted to say was also, don't try and be a Superman or woman. Actually, your teams struggle if you appear to be invincible, and actually showing a little bit of humility, a little bit of vulnerability goes a long way to helping them grow as individuals, that then in some ways changes the dynamic of your team. That's really critical. The other thing that I would say about resiliency is understand your own drivers. What is important to you and how do you achieve those? You know, back to Chris's North Star point, if you have those things that you are focused on, it does help to give you direction and clarity and communicate that to your team so you all understand where you're going.
Thank you, fantastic. Thank you both. Okay, so we've looked at building resilience across our teams. We've looked at building our own personal resilience as leaders. And I want to just unpack that a little bit more and specifically dig into mental health and wellness, which is actually a topic that Gareth is really very, very passionate about. And so we asked Gareth around his thoughts on this important area and why he thinks leaders should be prioritising mental health and wellness. Let's see what Gareth had to say.
I think we're more aware than ever of the challenges of mental health, although I actually think that that challenge has always been there and we've just not recognised it or been as open about talking about it. I would say it's slightly exacerbated now by the change in social media and the pressures that people would feel in their individual lives and the additional stream of negativity that might come into your life. So I think that has created a bigger challenge. But I think when I recognise my own resilience levels, there are real basics to looking after yourself that help. So when I feel strong, I can deal with pretty much anything that's thrown at me. And that means I need to have slept well. For me, exercise is important. It gives me space to go out. It produces natural endorphins that help me. So whenever we talk about recovery from performance, we talk of the basics of food, exercise, sleep. And no matter how many complex studies I read, we always come back to those fundamentals for players. Somebody spoke to me about recovery as a leader and recovery as a staff group and pointed out that we need to go through the same process. You know, how do we keep our energy levels? And energy is so important for people. So I think looking after yourself is a fundamental part of mental well-being, mental health. I actually like the phrase mental fitness because I think it's something we can work out. It's something we can acknowledge is there. We can help ourselves by making sure that we're looking after ourselves. And then you've got to talk. You know, in the end, it is fine to talk about these things. You might not want to talk with every group of people you meet, but there will be close friends who are probably going through exactly the same things you are. And I think when you go through life, you probably feel at times you're the only one having certain thoughts or feeling a certain way. And you'd probably be amazed at how many people are going through the same experiences.
So it's clear that mental health, or mental fitness, as Gareth puts this, is a topic that he's really passionate about, and it's an area where he shows a lot of empathy. And so, unfortunately, we live in a world where talking around mental health is often stigmatised, particularly amongst men. And therefore, given his context and his role, we asked Gareth what advice he would give around opening up this conversation amongst men.
I think there is a reluctance with men in particular to talk about mental well-being, and you know that's clear because at its extreme end, suicide rates of men are really high, and I think people don't recognise how common it is to feel pressure, doubt, uncertainty, lack of confidence. And I think one of the best things as a leader is to role model vulnerability and to talk with your staff if things go wrong. You know, I think it's perfectly fine to say, look, I got that wrong. You know, we can't just critique everybody else and remove ourselves from the equation in terms of why things might not have gone as well as we hoped. Now, of course, there's a balance. If you're getting everything wrong, then you lose credibility as a leader. But I think actually that opens up people feeling a bit safer to speak, and I think you can then start to create an environment where there's more psychological safety, which I think we all know from reading and research creates a better environment for people to be the best version of themselves.
So some really great insights there from Gareth around opening up the conversation by role modelling vulnerability and I think importantly creating a psychologically safe space in which to do so. Chris, I'd love to hear what initiatives you've seen organisations put in place to help open up these kind of conversations and to create a safe space in which to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I always like to recognise is there's huge diversity in people. That's a very obvious statement. But how we learn, whether we're introverted or extroverted, how we engage with our colleagues. So I think it's really important to create the space and the mechanisms to allow people to have the conversations in the way they want to have them. And then perhaps even more importantly, I think, is for leaders to show some level of vulnerability. Perhaps even show examples or talk about times where they've struggled with mental health or stressful times. To Alex's point earlier, I think if you portray that sort of superhuman persona, or attempt to in any case, it can backfire. So expressing some level of vulnerability, I think, starts at the top, and that opens up the space for a conversation.
Thank you, fantastic. Alex, anything that you've observed in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first and most important thing is mental health and well-being can't just be an agenda item on something that companies want to look at. It has to be ingrained in the culture of a company. And at Google, we take that incredibly seriously through a number of different initiatives. The first thing that we do quite regularly is we focus on well-being all the time. It's something that we do ensuring that people have got either the time, space, or even just the physical location to just go and take a moment out. Outside of that, the other things that are crucially important around mental health and well-being, as Chris said, is to not be superhuman. You have to show that air of vulnerability yourself. I think personal stories and authentic leadership is always something that is going to win in this space. People can only really bring the best of themselves if they have the ability to be truly vulnerable with the people they work with. And that age of being invincible at work, I think, is well and truly past us. The final aspect of it is also to acknowledge that just because we as leaders are comfortable talking about mental health and well-being, not everybody who's suffering at that point in time is. And actually creating either resource groups or confidential environments where people can talk to either allies or to just a safe body of people to express how they're feeling is crucially important. And again, something that Google would take really seriously.
Thank you both. Yeah, fantastic insights. So we've very much focused on the human side of leadership so far. However, in our increasingly digital world, whether you are the manager of the England men's team or you're the CIO of Kingfisher PLC, the chances are that you are using technology to connect or to support your teams and drive improved performance. And so we asked Gareth if he could share where he is using technology and in particular data to drive the performance of the England men's team. Let's see what Gareth had to say.
The fascinating thing for me is that the amount of data that we generate and that we use now is exponentially different to what it was 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago, when the only data we had was how far people ran in a game, and if we hadn't run far enough they made us run further in training the following week, which was hopeless use of data. So we would definitely have a lot of data on our physical performance. So every training session, GPS monitors how far did the players run, how many accelerations, decelerations. Basically that helps us to avoid injuries in training, which is key because to perform you need your best team on the pitch. Then there's the performance data around how we play. So we've spent a lot of time working out what's important for us. What helps us to win in every phase of the game, whether that's attacking, defending, set plays. And we monitor that over a long period. And so every match generates data on every pass, every shot, every tackle, and gives us a guide as to what our performance looked like. And the reason that's so important for us is that ours is a low-scoring game where you can actually perform really well and lose. And we have to make sure that we're not guided just by results. So we can win and have not played at the level we need to. And ultimately, if we keep doing that, we'll lose matches. So when we review, the data is important to analyse. And we can lose, having played really well, but one shot goes in at the other end. And we've got to make sure that we don't overanalyze the defeat or lose confidence in what we're doing if the data is telling us that actually the performance was better than the result. And I think in a world where results are how we're ultimately judged, and we're judged really emotionally on those results, we have to make sure that our level of feedback to the players is really clear and has some substance to it. So for us, data is an important feedback tool. It's part of our decision-making process. It's not all of the decision-making process. It supports what our eyes would tell us and our experience would feel. But it definitely helps when you're trying to make decisions.
I love Gareth's views on how the use of data has evolved over the years. Alex, as an organisation that's heavily invested in unlocking data to drive performance, I'm really interested in your views on what Gareth had to say.
No, it's brilliant. I mean, at Google, data is a huge part of what we do. And I think when we talk to clients about it and customers in the wider market, it falls really into two camps from my perspective anyway. The first one is around what do you do with the data that you have inside an organisation? So how much of it can you use? Do you really drive that in a way that provides meaningful insight, not just to the leadership team, but actually to everybody in the organisation? Data is a great way to empower everybody in the company to feel like they understand what's going on, what the objective is, and as Chris said, how you're doing against that. The other aspect of it that we see quite extensively is this term data-driven culture. And actually we've talked about culture from a Google perspective quite a lot already today, but actually ensuring that if you are going to use data, it's not, as Gareth said, the only metric that you look at. I don't think there's any replacement for gut feel. A lot of leaders get to where they get to by understanding the more subtle dynamics of the world. Data really needs to be there as a point just to reinforce that decision making and to help maybe guide a set of decisions on the way through a challenge.
Fantastic, thank you, Alex. Chris, could you share where you've seen data used well to drive performance?
Yeah, absolutely, in two places. And it comes back to this concept of signal in the noise, finding the signal in the noise. So in a past organisation, we worked to build something called a knowledge graph. So this ingests millions of nodes of data on researchers, academic researchers, the articles they publish, the institutions that fund them. So we ingest all this data, connect it, and then allow researchers to navigate the data to surface new insights. So that could be, perhaps I want to connect to another researcher that's got a similar topic that I want to work on, or an institution that can fund the research that I want to work on. And so that actually has a societal benefit because we're allowing research to get to market quicker at a high level of quality. The other one I think is internal sentiment analysis around team data. So there's tools in the market that allow you to survey your employees, your teams, to get a feel for how engaged they are, whether we're providing sufficient feedback. That surfaces in the form of employee NPS, that sort of thing. And Gareth mentioned it's important not to overanalyze data, which I completely agree with, because the more sophisticated tools out there will implement things like logistic regression, which allows you to optimize the data you're seeing so you actually get real insights and you don't make or take action on raw data. So I think that's really critical to analyze it in the right way, leverage AI, and then take action once you're really clear on what you need to do.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our last area for discussion. We've really explored some very human topics and we've started to touch on technology a little bit. And so let's wrap up by looking at a topic that really spans both of those, and that's hybrid work. So we now live in a world where many of us are working flexibly, perhaps we're at home 1 or 2 days a week, and perhaps in some situations teams rarely or never get together in one place. So we asked Gareth, what advice would you give around building a strong sense of team when team members are not physically together? Let's see what insights he had to share.
I think it's a really difficult challenge because the essence of being a team I think requires people to get together as often as they can. I think one of the keys is constantly reminding people of the overarching vision. What are we trying to do? Ultimately, what are we trying to come together to achieve? And when that's remotely done, it's more challenging in terms of the personal interactions and getting a feel for where people are in their lives. And so I think you've got to spend more time perhaps traveling to see them, going out of your way as a leader to communicate regularly, particularly perhaps at moments where they're having a more difficult time. I think people really appreciate when things are going well, there's hundreds of messages and pats on the back. When things aren't going so well, I think you find out more about people and you need more support. And I think as a leader, they're key moments to step in and have some of those interactions. So I think communication, regular communication is critical. If you're apart because of distance, you've probably got to make more of a conscious effort to get together with people.
Okay, so we've heard Gareth's perspective on this, and again I think some interesting points bringing us back to vision again, personal touches, communication and so on. And so Chris, perhaps we could come to you first this time. What advice would you give to leaders looking to build a strong team in this hybrid world of work?
I think as leaders we have to do the right thing, and the right thing is not necessarily synonymous with the easy thing. And so when it comes to remote working, we really don't have enough data yet on the impact on mental health being, or mental well-being rather. So I think we need to take time to really understand, is remote working, or the ways we've been thrown into remote working through COVID, the future? Should we all come back to the office? Because that human element that Gareth mentioned around coming together is still critically important. You can't just mitigate millions of years of evolution, or is there a balance? So until we have more data and we really understand the impacts, I think as leaders we have to make some hard choices around what the right balance is. And then finally, just the North Star, it's pervasive I think, but again, as Gareth talked about, if you've got a clear North Star, a clear objective as a team, then even if you are remote and not able to come together regularly in person, at least you're able to continue to work towards the shared outcome.
Great, thank you. Alex, how about you? What advice would you give?
So I think there's a couple of things. The first one is really, we have been thrown, as you said, Chris, thrown into remote working in a way that's just become normal for so many of us, that you come in the morning, you go to your desk and you sit in front of a webcam. I think the first thing to do is mix it up. We used to have these things called phones that people used to use and talk to one another and just give people time away from the camera. There's certainly become a lot of pressure to kind of always be camera ready, and I think one of the big things that lots of companies did was to kind of set out a mandate at the start of COVID, which is you don't always have to be camera ready, right? Actually, if you're not prepared or you're not ready, it's okay to not be on screen. I think the other thing is to encourage people to come together. As you talked about, there's so much that's gained over human physical interaction when you're in the same space. So what we try to do at Google is we look at moments that matter, things where actually you can really benefit from being in the same space. It doesn't preclude anyone if someone really can't make it because they have a commitment or something they can't be, we facilitate that. But we try to find choice moments where actually being in the same space will be advantageous for the collective.
Alex, Chris, thank you. Thank you. Well, that concludes today's briefing. Alex, Chris, and of course Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your openness, your honesty, and for sharing so much detail around the topics that we've discussed. And thank you to our audience for watching. I hope that there's been some great insights for you to take back to your own places of work. We very much hope to see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.